Hey guys, what's going on today? So today I'm going to talk about how to deal with a narcissist if you are in a relationship with them. Let's face it, this is one of the most difficult things that we're going to have to go through in our life. Um, and it's not necessarily your fault, although I'll talk about this a little bit more later on in the video. Something about your upbringing or your past as you were a child probably has something to do with why you ended up with a narcissist in the first place. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about, let's say you are in a relationship with a narcissist, right? And you can't really just cut the relationship off for whatever reason. Maybe you're married with them and it's a long administrative process. Maybe you have kids with them, you have to co-parent. Maybe you're still in the relationship and you are at your wit's end and you don't know what to do. Maybe you've decided to try to stick it out and see what happens. And I'm not going to say there's a right or wrong answer. A lot of people, they say, end the relationship, finish it, and I do think ultimately that's probably the best decision to make. But in reality, real life, we often have kids with these types of people and whatnot, and it's difficult to know how to deal with this type of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and just talk about in this video how to deal with these people in a way that ultimately progressively gives you more power and control and options and better decision making in the future. Now, that's not to say that this is the easy path. This is probably going to be, in many ways, staying with a narcissist is going to be very detrimental and potentially dangerous as well to your well-being and possibly just to your life in general. So it's not really like we have much of a choice. Either we stay with them and we suffer long-term, things don't change and things degrade until things ultimately become very dangerous for us. And I'm not necessarily talking about, the physical type of danger, but when all is said and done, it's going to be dangerous for your health. If you stay in a relationship with somebody like this who has decided that they're not going to change and they're just not sincere with their relationship. And that's what I talk about. When I say a narcissist, I'm not necessarily referring to any specific, diagnosis psychologically, because even that's very gray, even for people who are experts in the area. I'm just talking about, when I say narcissist, I'm talking about somebody who's insincere and dishonest in their communication, and somebody who's just basically looking for maximum control. And I think the real theme of it all is they're not honest and they're not sincere, right? And for me, sincere is the big word, right? Before I dive into this a little bit more, my personal experience with this is, growing up, my parents always, they were very religious, and they taught me a lot of good things that I'm very, thankful for, but they also gave me some destructive things. One of the things is they kind of taught is just pray, ask God to change it, and let things go, right? And God will make a difference. And, in most cases, that's not true. Like, for whatever reason, God has given us some agency to make changes ourselves, no matter how hard they might seem to be in the present moment. And that's one of the things is, like, I kind of had like a learned helplessness growing up. My parents would say something like, just pray about it. God is great. He will make the change. And he's the only one who can really do anything for you. And I respect that, and there is some truth to that, but I also think that we do have agency in this world, and we need to exercise our agency, especially if we're going to, really hold up to injustice and hold up to doing what is right and having a positive effect on the world. Because just saying that Jesus or God is going to change things for you, and then just letting things go and not actually following through yourself, is kind of, handing your power away, and ultimately kind of like learned helplessness. So I kind of go about this in the way that Jocko Willink, if you haven't heard of him, I recommend you learn a little bit more about him. You can just Google or YouTube Jocko Willink, but he was in the military, and He has a lot of advice for leadership and kind of like, taking control of your life and whatnot. Kind of like Jordan Peterson. And he says he has something he calls default aggression. And that's kind of what I'm talking about in this video. I don't necessarily recommend that you make a huge change in your life and that you just completely change your life 180 degrees today, and just go the opposite way of whatever you've been doing, just because this can have unexpected consequences. And it's kind of like ripping the band-aid off when you're not sure if the wound has healed yet or not. And you're not sure if ripping the band-aid off is going to actually leave you with a wound, like a gushing wound, or actually a healed wound. So I recommend kind of like peeling the band-aid off slowly. And default aggression allows you to take action and not be passive in the way that you think like, oh, the universe or God or whatever you believe in is going to solve things for you. Which I do believe in, to a certain extent, prayer and God and whatnot. But I do believe that we also have to be default aggressive, and we need to gradually point things in the right direction, whatever that means. And sometimes that just means making small changes today and continuing that day by day over the years, over the decades, perhaps, whether you decide to stay in a relationship with a narcissist or not. So one of the main things I would recommend doing is having minimum contact with the narcissist, just because everything seems to be a battle and an obstacle and an emotional wound that they're looking to try to use against you, and a battle for control, and you're just battling lies. When you're working with somebody who's not sincere, basically you are trying to talk about truth to somebody who denies truth and who won't even accept responsibility for their words or actions. So there's really nothing to be gained from trying to communicate with them, because they're not trying to communicate really with you at all. And actually, they think that the fact that you are trying to communicate and they're not, they think it's funny, and they think it's their little power, right? In reality, it doesn't give them power, but they think it does, because in the moment it appears to be, right? So they think you're stupid because you are trying to communicate on a real, sincere level, and they're not, right? And they think that's funny, and they think that gives them power. And that's kind of like they enjoy that dynamic, that you're the nice, honest, sincere guy, and that they can guilt trip you, and they can deny the past, deny the present, and just have no accountability or responsibility for their actions, right? But ultimately, although they think that doing all this gives them power, ultimately I would say that it doesn't, that they lose power in the long term. And I'll tell you why. Because when we learn that they can't be trusted, and they're not sincere, they're not honest, they have no accountability or responsibility, they teach us ultimately that that communication with them is impossible. And so we stop giving them the benefit of the doubt. We stop giving them leeway. Somebody that we would accept mistakes from would be somebody who's sincere, somebody looking for truth, and somebody who's not looking to control you or control the situation or manipulate you. But somebody that we know who's trying to manipulate, and somebody that we know isn't being sincere, we're going to approach them in a completely different way. It doesn't mean that we're going to be manipulative or insincere with them. It just means that we're going to play a completely different strategy with them than we would with somebody who is upfront and really making honest efforts to change or improve or have accountability, responsibility. So ultimately, we gradually take away access to us, and emotional access and communication, and we just generally close channels progressively in general, if we're honestly trying to improve the situation for ourselves as individuals, because things are not going to get better with a narcissist if we continue with them and Maybe it took us a while to get to this point of realization, and it's a difficult thing to realize, but that's just reality. And so we just pull back. Ultimately, the narcissist loses out, long term, because we start playing a different game that they think now that they're what's going to happen is you're going to pull back and be a little bit more cautious with them, and you're going to start putting boundaries up and limitations, pulling away. You're not giving them the benefit of the doubt anymore, and they're going to continue trying to manipulate you and deny the past and the present. And the problem with that is it's not going to work anymore, because you've already seen their game and you already know that they're incapable of making improvements or progression, right? So you are able to change your strategy in the way that you approach things. You are able to look for new social outlets. You are able to look for a new living environment. You are able to look for legal structure to protect your rights. You're documenting things. You have a huge, a new strategy that you're putting up, while a narcissist, they think that you are just stupid and, they are playing you and whatnot, because you can't even tell them, you're playing me. I see that you are emotionally trying to manipulate the situation, because even that turns into manipulation, denial, lies, guilt tripping, accusations, whatnot. So we can't even have a discussion with them that would potentially put them in a place where they can grow, because even that turns into just a toxic, destructive pit of despair. So we can't even give them that anymore, and ultimately that takes power away from them. But they are just too selfish and too desperate to hold on to control to admit it, right? So a few communication rules or things that I've learned recently. The main communication rule is, try to limit the access and the availability, the communication. Try to limit everything that you have with them as much as possible. Now, this isn't always possible to do in the short or midterm, but this is something you're aiming for the long run. And like Jocko Willink talks about, we're looking for default aggression, right? So we're not looking for 180% change in one day necessarily. We're looking for, we start communicating in a certain way with them. We start making other plans for our future lifestyle, or where we're gonna be and whatnot. So the main communication rules is, you want to be neutral and have no emotions, and always say we'll talk about it later to them, right? And I'll talk about what that means. So when you're neutral, narcissists, they hook onto you emotionally. Their language is a language of emotions, guilt, control, things like this, manipulation. They're trying to write the narrative, they're trying to rewrite the past, all these things, right? So what you want to do is basically be very neutral. They're trying to get you happy or sad or this or that or whatever, but if you stay neutral, if they're accusing you and you don't care, or they're love bombing you and you're just like whatever, the main thing is like they're not able to get their hooks in you. And if you're just kind of like, yeah, sure, whatever, all the time, no matter what it is that they do, and you're limiting access, they're going to get bored with you, and their hooks are just not going to work, right? So you want to be basically emotionless and not show, anything other than neutrality with them. And this works very well, and they'll be searching so bad, like it's funny, like they'll go from one subject to the next trying to hook you, and that's kind of when you need to get out, because they're just trying to do anything that would drive a sane person crazy. So that's when you kind of want to pull back and go do something else, change the subject or whatever. Just get out of the way physically. Don't necessarily make it look like you're trying to run or anything, because they hook onto that too. Just be like, hey, I have something to do, I forgot something, whatever. Something I use all the time is I say, we'll talk about it later, right? And what this does is when the narcissist is like, hey, we need to talk about our relationship or whatever, but talk about our relationship for them, of course, is not really talking about the relationship. Talking about the relationship for them means I want to manipulate you, guilt trip you, and write the narrative and rewrite the past with you, and I want you to listen as I assassinate your character, right? That's what they mean when they talk about talk about the relationship. So when they say something like, I need to talk about something, you can just say something, it's not the time, I don't feel like it right now, we'll talk about this another time, right? And then what I do usually is I take a step back, leave the premises, whatever, and then I'll send like an SMS or a text message, and I'll just send them a decision with what I came up with. Another thing is, don't explain yourself. Like if you say like, I don't want to talk about it because this or that or the other thing, the narcissist is going to hook onto the because, and they're going to say, oh yeah, well, if you don't want to talk about this because this and that, that's because you are ridiculous and you're crazy and you're overreacting. So never justify why you don't want to talk about it. Just make a decision, and don't say why you're making your decision. Giving them a reason for your decision gives them ammo for them to be toxic with. So just say, I've decided to not come on the summer vacation with you. I've decided that I'm going to, spend the night at my place. I'm going to live now in a different area. I've decided this, I've decided that, whatever it is. Just tell them you've decided and give no reason for it, because giving reasons gives them hooks, because they're looking for hooks. They're not looking for communication, right? Another thing is, you can be physically close and intimate with a narcissist. It's possible. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but sometimes you're in a situation where maybe you're a co-parent with the narcissist. Maybe you're not completely separate. Maybe the custody days aren't aligned, and maybe getting in a new relationship with a new person, a new healthy person, maybe that's not realistic with you in your situation. Maybe you kind of have to aggressively, go towards the life direction that you want while still having minimum contact. So what I would recommend in this case is, if you are physically intimate with a narcissist, to stay physically close as possible. You can be intimate, but you need to stay emotionally closed, right? And the narcissist is going to try to use this. They're going to maybe give you hugs, love bomb you, be physical, be intimate with you, and then they're going to expect you to open up emotionally, which was the old pattern. But now you've learned the new pattern. The new pattern is, okay, the legal structure isn't set up yet. You can't just form a new intimate relationship, but you are still being physically intimate or close with a narcissist from time to time, although you're trying to stagger that, aggressively to be less and less, right? So you just want to be emotionally closed. So just understand that if you are physically intimate with a narcissist, that they're going to try to use that to hook you. So just basically be like, you know what? We can be physically intimate, but that doesn't give you access to my emotional inner world, right? And you got to keep them at a distance. And that's really what it's all about. You want to basically cut out the ties as much as possible. The hard thing is when you are when you are hooked in a relationship with a narcissist, chances are you probably grew up in an abusive household where there's probably a narcissistic parent who had the main control of the family, right? They had control of the narrative, they had control of the family image, they had probably control over the family finances. And so you grew up thinking that being dominated or having a certain toxic environment, for you, that was what you grew up with. That's how you survived growing up as a kid. So as you're an adult, you ultimately think, hey, this person is toxic, this person is domineering, this person has, very toxic traits. That will actually kind of pull you towards them, because that's all you've known. That's the secure world. That is psychological home for you, right? And that is very real and very powerful and very hard to change. And you're probably not going to be 100% effective with it ever, right? But you can limit the control that has over you, and you can grow bit by bit into a new person, right? And that's the main thing. That's the main thing. The main thing is that you're just, you're becoming a new person, and, you're gradually making changes in the right direction. I'm not saying you're always going to have toxic relationships. I'm just saying that, you're growing and you're working on what you can work on, because you can't work on the narcissist. You can't work on the other person, but you can work on yourself, right? You can change yourself. Look at the man in the mirror, like Michael Jackson says, make that change where you can and take control where you can, right? So the main thing is you're going to try to make the narcissist irrelevant. And that's the main thing. You're working towards this. It's not going to happen overnight, and you're probably enmeshed with them to the point where a lot of your social contacts are actually the social contacts of the narcissist, and maybe you don't have any real social contacts that the social narcissist doesn't control the narrative over. That's been my case certainly here. I live in France, so I don't really have many opportunities where I can easily make friends just because my French sucks, and there's a stigma here in France. What I've learned, my personal experience, unless you're living in Paris or something like that, is it's very hard to make friends when you don't speak French. So you're probably emotionally and socially isolated to an extent, right? And it's not something you designed, it's something the narcissist designed, right? But the unfortunate thing is you now need to kind of recreate a social life as you can, that doesn't include the narcissist. So you need to have groups or people that you know outside of the narcissist's reach, just so you don't lose your mind, just so you don't, because if all your contacts are controlled by the narcissist, narration and framing of the situation, you're going to start, like, your world is just filled with people who believe or think what the narcissist feeds them, right? So the main thing is you're trying to make the narcissist irrelevant. So emotionally, socially, and psychologically, you might be isolated to an extent. So you just need to kind of work on this as you can. Personally, me, I've got a lot of things on my plate, a lot of projects that I need to work on. I don't have much time to create those connections right now, just because I have like custody over my kids, new job searches, just everyday type stuff, managing the finances, legal issues, so many things that I don't really have necessarily the time to make social interactions like a high priority on my list. But psychologically, it's very important, right? So we do what we can. I reach out to groups on Facebook with, single dads who are trying to get custody of their kids. I go to the gym. I try to see the same faces each time. I try to frequent the same stores. And I'm looking into like a language exchange program. I'm considering things that I can do, right? But it is what it is. Like we said, we didn't say this was going to be easy, but we're doing the best that we can, right? And over time, it makes change, right? Just making these videos helps me because I can put the word out for people who are in the same type of situation, right? So like I said, the work that you need to do is on you. There's nothing much you can do for the other person, right? Not saying that, you can't hope or pray for them or whatever, but at the end of the day, you have to take the agency that you have, and you also have to see things. If you have kids in this dynamic, see things in the long term, like, what are your kids putting up with? What is the family dynamic like at the narcissist's house, right? What type of toxicity is that really doing, right? And I'm not saying it's easy, and there's a lot of landmines, a lot of things to be careful of as you try to pull out of the situation as much as you can, eventually build a new life, hopefully find a new partner, all these things. Managing time alone, managing kind of like trying to create your own structure, your own system. It's not easy, and honestly, it's exhausting. And there are days when you want to go crazy. I'm not going to like sugarcoat it or say that it's fun or easy or whatever, but it is what it is, So just do the best you can. Let me know if you have any comments about your experiences, anything you might have learned along the lines of this video. If you would like and subscribe, that would be awesome. But otherwise, I'm just making these videos kind of for the future, for me to watch over, look at the growth, look at the changes, and also potentially for my kids so they can kind of see where I'm coming from in the future. And also after that, whatever, this is more of kind of like a creative growth project than anything else. But I'm glad if you got any value from this. All right, take care.